super excited to be hosting Flipside Crypto for our weekly workshop. I know a lot of you already use Flipside for your MetricsDAO bounties, and I've at least heard of them. But in case you haven't, Flipside is a Web3 data provider. They provide completely free data across a ton of different chains. So obviously they have Ethereum, but also Solana, Arbitrum, Algorand, Near, Flow, Optimism. I know I'm forgetting a bunch, but so it's completely free. They have a ton of different chains, and they have an amazing team focused on curating and labeling that data so that it's super easy super easy, as easy as it can be for data analysts to use that data. And on top of that, they want to make it easily accessible. So today we're joined by Flipside's co-founder and CTO, Jim Meyers, who will be telling you a bit more about how to access that data, specifically giving a demo of Flipside Crypto's ShroomDK, which gives you access to query that data by minting a free NFT. So it's super cool. And the key things to remember is that it's free, it's accessible, it's easy to use. So yeah, I'm super excited to see this demo. And before I hand it over to Jim, just a quick announcement. If you have any questions during the call, feel free to write them in the chat. If you don't know where that is, if you go next to Build in Public on the left-hand side, you'll see a little open chat bubble option. Click on that and you can write in there. And Jim can see those, answer them if they make sense, and otherwise we'll take all questions at the end. And that's it. And if I hear background noise or anything, I will try to mute you. Don't take it personally, but it's easier that way. So yeah, without further ado, handing it over to Jim.
Thanks, Rochelle, for the intro. Happy to be here, and thanks to MetricsDAO for hosting me today. Excited to walk all of you through what we've been working on. So our SDK, also known as ShroomDK, lets you query dozens of different blockchains, wherever you work, be that in Python, JavaScript, TypeScript, R, as well as directly with our REST API. And so for the past couple of years, Flipside's data has been queryable via our Velocity query UI that I think many of you are familiar with. And then, today we can now query all of this data directly programmatically with the API and the SDKs. So I'm going to walk you guys through a few examples here. I'm going to start by just sharing my screen. So what you guys are all looking at right now is our Velocity query UI, which I think many of you are already familiar with. And this is the product that Flipside has had for the past couple of years. And we make all of our data freely accessible here. And so in this example, I've written a query. I'm a big fan of Moonbirds, and I've written a query to gather NFT metadata for Moonbirds from our DIM NFT metadata table on Ethereum. And so, while this is great, if you want to programmatically access this data, for a long time you haven't been able to do that. And so this is really where our REST API and SDKs come in handy. I'm going to show you guys first how to access this via our REST API, and then I'm going to walk through some of our SDKs. I'd like to start with the REST API just to give everyone an idea of how things work under the hood. So let's open up Postman, and there are two endpoints that are part of the REST API. There's one to submit a query to be executed, and there's a second one to retrieve the results of a query. And so with this first endpoint here, I can take this query that we wrote in the Velocity UI, and I can actually I already have it here, and I can submit this. And what I end up doing when I submit this is I am creating a query run on Flipside's query engine. So Flipside's query engine processes millions of queries per month. And basically you're just submitting another run to that to be executed. You get back a token, which represents the query run that we've created. And we can then get the results from this here. So the second endpoint returns the results. The idea is you poll that endpoint and it returns various states as the query is executing, from running all the way to obviously completed in this case, but also has things like error states. For example, if you wrote a malformed query or if something went wrong with the query execution, it would display that. Now, while this is pretty flexible and pretty powerful in what it gives you access to, it's a bit cumbersome to have to deal with these two endpoints and deal with the various states of the REST API. And so to make it even simpler than this, we have created a few different SDK wrappers. And so, I get asked a lot, okay, like what's an SDK? And really just think about the SDK as code that sits on top of the API endpoints so that you don't actually have to hit these directly. And we've written these in Python and JavaScript, TypeScript, and R. So you can start interacting with our data wherever you want, in whatever language or environment you're comfortable in. And so I'm going to, in a second, start by diving into an example on Python. And then I'll eventually move into some JavaScript and TypeScript examples. But before I do that, I'm going to pause for a few seconds to see if anyone has any questions before I dive into those examples. Okay, cool. Let's keep going then. So let's open up. I'm going to open up a notebook here that I wrote in Python. And so the Python library is just a pip package called ShroomDK hosted on PyPy. So, if you want to install this locally, anyone can do that just by running pip install ShroomDK. We then just import it, and then in just a few lines of code, we can get query results. So here what I'm doing is, you have to have an API key, and I'll show you guys in a bit how you can all generate an API key today. But you create an instance of ShroomDK, which we had imported. And I'm writing a query here to get the number of addresses that have received the X metric token so far. And so in this example, I'm querying the Polygon tables that Flipside has. In the previous example, I was showing Ethereum. We have data on over a dozen different blockchains, maybe approaching about 20 different blockchains at this point, constantly adding new ones, constantly curating new data sets. And so here, if I run this, so that returned pretty quickly, 0.2 seconds. What this did under the hood was it took this query and what I had just shown with the REST API, it created a query run, and then it polls the second endpoint to get the results. Instead of having to deal with that, all you have to do is say sdk.query here, and it handles getting that data set back for you. It also, since we're writing this in in Python, we can just do simple string interpolation here to inject data into our query. So this sdk.query, it returns what's called a query result set. And a query result set looks like this. It has a query ID, it has a status of either pending or finished or error. It has the various columns that are returned. It has rows, the run stats, so things like how long the query took, how many rows were returned on it. And then it also has this very convenient helper called records, which converts the data that's returned by the API into nice and easy to use JSON objects. And so, for efficiency over the network, we transport the data more in a CSV type manner. And so records makes it a little bit easier to use, especially with Pandas data frames. And so here we can just explore this data for a second. So you can see up here in the query, we selected the count of 2 addresses as recipient count. And so in the data, recipient count becomes a key on the data object. And so we're asking for the first record and the recipient count here. And so we see there are 425 unique recipients of X metric tokens so far. Now, let me, hold on one sec. I want to bring up, in these notebooks, there's some useful information sometimes displayed that we can look at. So let's, so that was a pretty simple example here, but let's move on to something a little more advanced. Let's say we want to build a leaderboard of the balance of every X metric holder between what they've received and also what's been burned. And so here I wrote up a query, basically a CTE to get the tokens that have been sent, as well as the tokens that have been burned. And then I am bringing these together. And I like to store a lot of my queries. I put this query here just to show you guys, but I like to store a lot of my queries as files that I can reference. So I just have this saved as a SQL file. And all I'm doing is reading that in, and I am querying this data. In this case, though, I'm using page size and page number. And so I am only returning a subset of the results. I'm going to show an example with a React app in a little bit. And this comes in handy in a big way there, especially if you don't want to be downloading massive result sets. The max size of results a query will return via the SDK is 10 million records, and then 100,000 per page. So if I run this, it ran this query, and we have the top 10 participants by their balance of X metric tokens. And we can simply just, we can page through these just by saying page number equals 2 and get the next page. We can also on the fly change the page size. So it could be page size 50 and get page 2. And so something to note too, when you're sending this, we're not actually re-executing the query, which is pretty cool. We are saving the full result set of your query, and then we have an optimized way on our backend that allows you to quickly page through the results of that query. And then finally, I want to show off kind of how you can use this with Pandas data frames. So here, I'm actually going to rerun this query, but I'm not going to run it in a paginated manner. I'm going to ask for the full query result set. See, I got an error here. There we go. And so what I am doing here is I'm actually just plotting this. I mentioned before this interfaces pretty nicely with data frames. So you can just call the records object that's on the result set and pass it in. And then I'm using just Plotly to graph this in a notebook. And so this is a distribution right now of X metric balances. So we can basically see that majority of people that possess X metric hold a balance between 0 and 200. And then there's fewer people up here. This one person is an outlier, has about 20,000, it looks like X metric. So they've been highly active. Before I keep going, I have some other kind of fun examples using like cross-chain exploration here. Does anybody have any questions so far on the Python examples? I'll pause for a second before I keep going. Okay, great. So far we've been just looking at data about Xmetric on Polygon. But if you wanted to get some insight, say, into what users are doing that are on other chains, it's also possible to do that. Any of the databases that are part of Flipside can be joined to any other databases. And so in this example here, I'm getting all of the Xmetric holders, and I want to understand what other tokens they hold on Ethereum. And so I can build up this query on Polygon, and then I can join that data set from the Polygon database to the Ethereum database. And so again, I save this stuff to a file. I'm going to execute this. And here I have the top, what did I do? Top 25, yeah, the top 25 token holdings. And again, I just did the same sort of thing I did above. I passed it the records object from that result into a data frame, Pandas data frame. And then I'm using Plotly to plot the results. So now that I've gone through the Python example, a lot of times what we want to do is take some analysis that we've done or some insight that we've gathered, and we want to build it as part of a website. And there's a pretty easy way to do that with the JavaScript TypeScript SDK that Flipside has. I'm going to walk through how to integrate that into a React app. Before I do that, though, any questions the group has so far on Python or the REST API that I've walked you guys through? Okay, cool. We'll keep going then. Let's open up the React app. Let me show you that. So this is a pretty simple example. I'm basically creating a leaderboard page of all of the Xmetric holders. And it's a little contrived. I'm showing off, I want to show off two features here, pagination as well as caching, which becomes really important for user experiences, the user experience on the front end. And so here I just asked for give me the top Xmetric holders by balance, and give me page 1 and page size of 10. I can quickly go through the pages just by changing that. Can also change the page sizes. And so the reason pagination becomes very powerful on the front end is, let's say, in the future, let's say that there's millions of Xmetric holders, which would be amazing. We don't want to return all of that data to a front end, which is probably going to crash someone's browser. And so being able to just ask the SDK for, hey, run this query, but just give me a subset of the data, provides a really nice user experience as someone's building out a React app. And second, we have query caching. So there's a notion of a TTL whenever you're executing or sending a query to the query engine. So you can say, okay, run this query and save the results of that query for up to X many minutes. And so in this case here, this leaderboard, I had it set to 15 minutes. So what that means is every user, after the first user that comes to the page, it's going to be really, really quick. And then, every 15 minutes, for example, this would expire. And the first time it's hit, the query might take a little bit longer. So instead of returning in like less than, 500 milliseconds, it might return in 20 seconds or something like that. So both really handy features when you're trying to think about how to build a front end product and, balance between running pretty big queries and providing a smooth user experience. And I'll show you guys how this works actually on the back end here. So to get this started, so we have this React app here, and it's as simple as adding to your package.json when you create a React app, just adding Flipside Crypto SDK, setting up the version. And I've created a route for Xmetric and I'm not going to go through all the specifics of React right now, but I'm just going to point out, basically what's happening is when the page loads, you have those two input boxes, and as those input boxes change, you can submit a form to rerun the query. And what I've done is create this get xmetric holders function that takes page size and page number as inputs. And this function is really what holds the SDK code. So we import from Flipside Crypto SDK, we import the Flipside object, and we create an instance of that down here, passing in our API key, as well as the API URL. And then we create a query object that contains the SQL, as well as how long we want this to be cached for, our TTL, and then also the page size and page number. And then we call query.run with that query object, and we get back, similar to the Python example I showed you, you get back a query result set, which matches pretty much one-to-one with what you see on the Python side. And something to note here with the TTL, the way that works is when you submit a query, what we end up doing is we take a hash of this, and then that's how we basically do lookups. And then we expire that after X many minutes. And then if you resubmit the query after that, we'll do another hash. And if we don't find it in our storage, we'll re-execute it against our query engine. And then once the results come back, you can basically access the records on it, which is what I'm doing. I'm passing it to this table object that we created, which is what's displaying the data. Now that's everything I have for examples today. I was going to show you all how to grab API keys. Before I do that, any questions on these examples? I know we'll have questions at the end, but just like to pause as I go. Okay, cool. Keep going then. So to get an API key, so that's like what you put into this when you initialize Flipside or in the Python side, you go to sdk.flipsidecrypto.xyz. The SDK, or rather the API key, is generated when you mint a ShroomDK NFT. And these are free to mint, and you mint one, and then you can generate, basically you connect your wallet, and then they appear here. So I have two keys here. I use one for production, one for development. And you click on this, and you get basically a dashboard of your usage of that API. You've got your key here, which I've been using, and then you can regenerate this key whenever you want. In the case of a front-end app, we, basically so people don't take your API key and start using it on their front end, what we do is we allow you to add host names that are allowed to access that on a front end. And then you've got some basic usage stats here, as well as some of the most recent queries you've been running and the status and the rows. So this can be helpful when you're trying to debug what's going on. There's also a pretty high daily query limit that we set of about 10,000 queries per key. So this is how you generate a key to access everything I just showed you. I do want to call out one thing, and so that is, if you're trying to run more than what this daily query limit is, or you find yourself wanting to download or copy all of our data, please don't do that via the API first off. But it'll take a lot of time, and there's better tools for the job. If you want to access any of our data at a deeper level, or want higher query throughput, we offer free Snowflake data shares that will replicate all of our data in your very own Snowflake account. which we already give access to a lot of large enterprises today that tap into that. And so I'd also be happy to get anybody set up with our Snowflake data shares if you're looking to do a deeper level of data integration. I'm going to stop there and then allow time for questions.
There's a question in the chat. Is there a way to similarly protect the API key in Jupyter or Colab notebooks that may get shared publicly? And more people are
right. Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, no, not at the moment. Like if you share your API key, if it's visible, somebody else can copy that key. And based on the way, well, it depends how, I believe the way Jupyter is executing that is on some backend somewhere. So it's not going to protect it in the same way that a front end React app might. Yeah, and that's a good point about environment variables there. Yeah. Hosting options or examples. So there isn't really anything to host. That's kind of the fun thing. All of the heavy lifting. I mean, so Flipside has lots of node infrastructure and basically petabyte scale data warehouses on the back end that really are. We do all of that heavy lifting so that you can focus on just building. And so we're just exposing all of this via an API. So there's nothing for you to host, no nodes to worry about, no data warehouses to worry about. Can I write my queries in Python or R? Well, so queries are always written in SQL, but you can, in the examples I just gave with the Python SDK, and I didn't walk through the R SDK, but you can submit your SQL via those SDKs. You can't use SQL Alchemy because it's more of like an ORM to like say like a relational, more of like a row-based database. So I wouldn't use SQL Alchemy with this. And the SDK is you can think about it kind of as a wrapper on top. Hosting front end is like Vercel. We are big fans of Vercel. We use Vercel a lot. And so very easy to deploy a React app to something like Vercel. I've done that in the past with a few different things with the ShroomDK TypeScript library. Fly.io is another one that we're also big fans of. We use that a lot as well. Good one. Any other questions before we go?
I guess to recap, maybe for everyone, I know you've touched on this a lot, but how is ShroomDK and Flipside data different from other blockchain data APIs?
Sure, that's a good question. So I think about that in probably three distinguishing factors. So one, I think about data access points. So I think that, curated data or data in general is really only valuable if you can use it in the places where you work. And so, we think about everything from an analyst that just wants to use a simple UI, like, the Velocity UI that we've had for a couple of years now, to the SDK I just showed you. If you want to get access, quickly get set up using this programmatically, all the way to, companies that we're working with that want to build out a on-chain data lake in Snowflake. And we're enabling those folks with our data. So, we focus on a wide array of data access points to make so you can place the data where you want it, where you need it. So that's one. Two is just our cross-chain data ability. We have ingested dozens of different chains. And we have an entire analytics team which does such an incredible job of going really deep on these chains and curating the data sets. We have new tables coming out every week that make it easy to use. And then finally, the third thing is we offer full query access. This isn't just a curated API. This is a full SQL interface to basically a petabyte scale database. So that's pretty powerful. And I guess the fourth thing is it's all free. We believe in our data being open and democratizing data access. And so everything that I've gone through so far and talked about is all free. The full list of chains. Yeah, you can see a full list of chains by going to, we probably actually have a better list somewhere on a page that I don't know about, but the simplest way to do that, to find the list, is to go to type in your browser flipside.new, and it will bring you to the query interface, and all of the databases that are on the left-hand side in the Data Explorer is everything that you can access today. There's also a lot hidden under Flipside prod DB there. We're actively working on migrating things out up one level into their own database. And so there's a bunch of stuff in there too that's not yet at the top level. So you can expand that and look inside.
There are questions in general. Are you able to see those, Jim?
Yeah, I just switched over to that.
Alors, programme. Checker.
So,
mets sur salon antique.
yeah, so I see where are the JavaScript examples. So that's a good question. So we do actually have JavaScript examples in the docs. If you go to docs.flipsidecrypto.com and you go to SDKs, you can click on JavaScript TypeScript, and you've got examples here. We also have examples in R as well. And everything I showed you today is also available on our GitHub. And so if you go on our GitHub Flipside Crypto SDK, which is a public repo, you go to examples and React app. I have the full React app that I was walking all of you through here. And then in Python, I also have all of these notebooks. The MDAO intro notebook, well, you're not going to be able to preview it here. Oh, you can. Huh. Yeah, which has what I just walked through.
Okay. Are there any more questions from this group? And otherwise, thank you so much, Jim. This was awesome. And we'll be sharing the recording we'll be sharing the recording in general, and probably in the Flipside Discord as well.
Great. Thanks for having me. This was fun to walk through. If anyone has any questions, feel free to DM me. I can answer those offline. Or if anyone is interested in talking about different data access points, happy to talk about all the ways that we can get our data, get you set up with our data.
Awesome. Thanks, everyone.